I want to welcome you all to worship this morning, and I'm glad to see that you're here, for today is a special day. And I'm not talking about it being early March, the first Sunday in March or anything like that. It is a special day because today, March 3rd, is National Soup It Forward Day. It's also National Mulled Wine Day, National Cold Cuts Day. It's probably one of my favorites. National I Want You to Be Happy Day and National Anthem Day, and more. And since it's also the first Sunday of March, it is also Finisher's Medal Day. Seems like there's a day for almost everything. In fact, coming up here in March 27th, it's actually National Joe Day. And the founder of National Joe Day invites all people to change their name to Joe for this one day so that everyone can experience the honor of being a Joe. Years ago, there was a national survey measuring how well people liked their names. And about 21% of the people said they disliked their names enough to consider changing them. So if you're part of that 21% that has never liked your name, your day is coming. Mark it on the calendar, March 27th. For one day only, you can change your name to Joe. You're welcome. I think it's kind of interesting that the Bible passage for today is a story about a young man who wanted to make a major change in his life. He didn't want to change his name. Instead, he wanted to get away from his family. He wanted to get away from his hometown. He wanted to make a new life for himself in a faraway place. Even if that meant hurting the people that he loved the most. Even if that meant burning bridges and losing his way. Even if that meant ending up in a place that he never imagined that he'd be. It's kind of like the 49-year-old man from Germany, Erwin, who in 1977 spent his life savings for a special trip to the magical city of San Francisco, California. The flight had a short layover in Bangor, Maine, before reaching that final destination. And while on the layover, the flight attendant casually wished Erwin a good time in San Francisco, unaware that the German passenger didn't speak any English. He heard those two magic words, San Francisco, and assumed that he had reached his destination. He got off the plane in Bangor, Maine, and began touring the town. He wandered the streets of Bangor for 3 days before he discovered his mistake. A local family took him in. His story made it to the local newspaper, and a strange thing happened from there. The residents of Bangor, Maine, rallied after this lost foreigner. The locals threw Erwin a 50th birthday party. The Penobscot Indian Nation named him an honorary member. A local songwriter wrote a folk song about him. The Bangor government gave him a small parcel of land in northern Maine. Even the governor of Maine visited Erwin. And within a week, Time magazine had published an article about Erwin, and the Today Show did a segment on the lost foreigner who received a hearty welcome in an unexpected place. Not to be outdone, the San Francisco Chronicle covered the story and paid for Erwin's trip to San Francisco, where he rode a cable car, met the city mayor, and attended a rodeo where he received a standing ovation. 1 year after his whirlwind trip to the United States, Erwin returned to Bangor, Maine for a visit with the folks who had so generously welcomed him to their town. And according to the local assessor, he continued to pay property tax on the plot of land that he had been gifted in Maine, even though he never came back to see it. Wouldn't it be great if every story of being lost had a happy ending? And a lot of them do. But sometimes a trip to a faraway place takes us away from our sense of self, takes us away from our sense of security and our source of strength. Sometimes a trip to a faraway place ends up in brokenness or loss or regret. A university professor in Australia recruited 657 adults between the ages of 20 and 80 and asked them to discuss the 10 biggest decisions that they had made in their life so far. I wonder if you were recruited for the study, what would you list as your 10 biggest life decisions so far? Kind of interesting to think about, isn't it? The professor and the study subjects then sorted and ranked the decisions according to how often certain decisions were mentioned and how significant the decisions were in the course of each person's life. and the emotions that were connected to those decisions. I think this study is interesting because of what it says about the decisions that we regret. The professor of the charge of the study reports this, quote, "The most enduring regrets in life result from decisions that move you further from the ideal person that you want to be." And that makes sense, doesn't it? The most enduring regrets in life result from decisions that move you further from the ideal person that you want to be. I think it's important to point out before I jump into the Bible story for today that we have all made decisions that have moved us further from the ideal person we want to be. And that we have all made decisions that have moved us further from the ideal person God made us to be. And that's exactly what sin is. Sin is moving away from God's perfect character and perfect will. Romans 3:23 reads, "For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God." So today's Bible story is good news for all of us. It's about a son who rebels against his family, who asks for his share of the family inheritance so he can go off to a distant country and start a new life. The end result is he squandered his fortune in wild living and ended up broken alone in a foreign land. And when a severe famine spread through the whole country, the young man became desperate and hired himself out to a pig farmer just to keep from starving to death. Now, feeding pigs was rock bottom. It was the most shameful job that a young Jewish man could have. The son in Jesus' story had rejected his father, lost his inheritance, and brought shame on his whole household. And according to the Old Testament custom, that was worthy of death. This is one of Jesus' most famous stories. We all know it so well. But Jesus' stories are never just about the story. Every story Jesus told is an introduction to God's heart. And if you ever wanted to know what God is like, then this story is for you. And if you truly want to understand the nature of God's heart, then always look at who Jesus' audience is. For Jesus never told a story just to entertain or instruct. He told stories to draw people closer to God. So he is very careful to choose the right story for the right audience. So as our story begins today, earlier in the scriptures, we read this. Now the tax collectors and sinners were gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." And then Jesus tells this parable. So what do these verses tell us about God's heart? Jesus is telling his audience of outcasts that God welcomes you, that you are important to him, not as a project, not as a charity case, but as a friend. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Paul Tournier was a Swiss physician, a counselor, and an author who became famous for his books on patient care. Tournier believed that physical, emotional, and spiritual health were interconnected, and he focused on addressing the whole patient in his medical practice. His methods were so effective that doctors came from all over the world to learn from him. Tournier once wrote, quote, "It's a little embarrassing for students to come over and study my techniques. They always go away disappointed because all I do is accept people." That's interesting, don't you think? All I do is accept people. There is healing in acceptance. Jesus' interactions with others were remarkably open. He noticed people whom others overlooked. He touched people who were judged untouchable. He had no walls of acceptability around him, and this openness caused the local religious leaders to view him with suspicion and contempt. And even today, we struggle to just accept and love people as they are. Even today, that kind of love is radical. In 1989, Mother Teresa visited Phoenix, Arizona to open a homeless shelter. There was a huge celebration in the city of Phoenix to welcome her, with crowds packing the local Veterans Memorial Coliseum to hear her speak. She was invited to do a radio interview in Phoenix's largest radio station, KTAR. Before the interview, the radio host asked Mother Teresa if there was anything he could do to help her with her work. See, he was accustomed to lending his celebrity to various charities or making donations for good causes. But that's not what Mother Teresa wanted from him. Instead, she said, yes, there is. Find somebody nobody else loves and love them. Find somebody nobody else loves and love them. That's how Jesus lived his life. He found people that nobody else loved, the people who had been told that God couldn't love them, and he loved them. He made them the center of his attention. He made them the good guys in his stories. And that's the whole reason he was telling this story. Let me tell you about a man named Ron Baptiste. Baptiste, a biker, became a Christian while serving a short stint in prison. And when he got out of prison, he couldn't find a church where he felt comfortable. So Baptiste started his own church, Covenant Confirmers Ministries, near Nashville, Tennessee. And Covenant members include former addicts, gang members, prostitutes, and even a local police sergeant. Tom Hollingsworth, a Covenant member who also spent time in prison, says of his church, quote, "You don't have to clean up, you just get connected to God. Anybody is welcome here, anybody. Just get connected to God." And that's the point of every one of Jesus' stories. That was the point of Jesus' life. That is what led Jesus to the cross, just to connect us with God. What does this story tell us about God? First and foremost, it tells us that we are all welcome. The second thing that Jesus is telling his audience of outcasts is that God is waiting for you. As Jesus continues his story. The son in the story is starving and desperate. He decides to head home and beg for mercy. He knew he had destroyed any chance of rejoining his family. He had destroyed any chance for forgiveness. But he thought to himself, I'll confess my sin to my father. I'll ask him to take me on as a hired servant. If you have ever thought that you have gone so far away from God's ideals that you are no longer worthy to be called God's child, then you understand this younger son's decision. And Jesus said, but while he was still a long way off, the father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son and he threw his arms around him and he kissed him. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. The father who had been rejected, the father who had been shamed by his son's actions, the father standing at the window waiting for his son to come home. That's how he saw him while he was still a long way off. And that father didn't wait for his son to make that long journey up the doorstep. He didn't wait for his son to repent or apologize. He didn't wait to see the red, swollen, tear-filled eyes or the young face now hardened and haggard from hunger and shame. While the son was still a long way off, the father ran to him and threw his arms around him and kissed him. William Mule tells the story of a 5-year-old boy who had made a ceramic dish as a Christmas gift for his parents. And as the boy gathered up his things to go home on the last day of winter term, the wrapped gift slipped from the boy's hands and it hit the floor with a crunch. The boy froze, then burst into tears. He had ruined his parents' very special handmade gift. The father tried to comfort the boy. Don't cry, son, don't cry. It doesn't make any difference. But the mother lifted the boy up into her arms. She held him close as tears ran down her cheeks too. And when the boy finally calmed down, she picked up the gift and said gently, let's pick up the pieces and see what we can make of what's left. God is waiting to welcome you home. God is waiting to restore you. No matter how far away you may have gone from God's character and God's will, God is saying to us through Jesus Christ, let's pick up the pieces and see what we can make out of what is left. And this isn't just a moment of restoration. This is a moment of celebration. Jesus ends the story with these words. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. And so they began to celebrate. There's a story of a teenage girl who rebelled against her family and became increasingly estranged from them. And one night, the daughter was arrested for drunk driving, and the mother had to pick her up from the local jail. And it was a long, silent car ride home. And the daughter could only imagine all the angry words that her mother must be holding inside as they drove home. And the next day, the mother presented the daughter with a small gift wrap box, and inside it was a rock. The daughter rolled her eyes. "Cute, Mom," said the daughter. "What's it for?" "Read the card," her mother said. And inside was a card that read this, quote, "This rock is more than 200 million years old. That's how long it will take before I give up on you." God is never going to give up on you. You are accepted, you are loved, you are welcomed, and you are waited for. That's the message of Jesus' life. That's the motive for Jesus' death, to show us that God would give everything that God has to save us and restore us and to bring us home again. Can you trust your life to a God like that? I pray that today is the day that you commit your life to God, or recommit your life to God, and come home to the God who is running to meet you with open arms. Amen.